Hello, Caw Prairie. Hear the word of the Lord. Matthew 25, verse 31 and following. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, there he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at his right hand, and the goats at his left. And then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." But the righteous ones will reply then, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? Or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And then the king will say, "I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of these, the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me." This is the word of the Lord. During the weeks of this sermon series, Neighborhood Watch, you and I have been watching and looking at and listening to powerful role models of everyday Christians like you and me, probably with a little more boldness and a little bit more resume track record to make them so successful at what they do. But we've been looking at other Christians and how they responded to the least of these. The first week we looked at Professor Ana Maradiaga, a chemistry professor of all people, but an immigrant herself, and hearing how she related to and how she viewed the immigrants and refugees in the United States of America. 2 weeks ago, then, we looked at, we heard from this powerful message from Pastor Ann Rundquist from the Gathering Table in Kansas City, and two of the volunteers and recipients of services there as they minister to the homeless and the drug addicted and the chronically mentally ill. We heard a lot of powerful, heartbreaking stories about what life is like on the streets and how she and her team minister to them. And then last week, we heard from Pastor Stephen Barbie and two of the men who live in Second Chance House in Leavenworth, and how their lives have been changed because Pastor Stephen and Pastor Jermaine Wilson and their support team are ministering to these returning citizens from prisons, Leavenworth and Lansing, right up the highway from us in Kansas. Caw Prairie, and now today, we're not going to do anything as exotic as immigrants, refugees, homeless people, or ex-convicts. We're talking about us today. Because while very few of us would fit those past categories, all of us fit today's category. All of us get sick, and all of us are going to die. And we're going to hear from two very inspirational women, one colleague of mine, Chaplain Reverend Ashley Huber, and then the Caw Prairie leader, Sonda Caffrey, and hear how their hearts have been called to the ministry of when those are sick, visiting them. And then I'm going to close at the end of their interviews with a little bring it back home and a challenge. And maybe it'll be an uncomfortable one. I hope you'll stay to the end. I'll see you on the other side.
Good morning. My name is Ashley Huber. I am an ordained pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and I am also a board-certified chaplain who serves at the University of Kansas Health System.
And if you could recognize me from behind my mask, I did tell Ashley she had to take the mask off so you could see her face. But we're here at KU Med Center where masks are mandatory. So that's why I'll be shouting through mine. And I brought it like a double, triple insulated one. So I
Perfect.
Anyway, Ashley and I have been friends for almost 20 years since I first moved to town.
Yep.
And I'm super excited that she said yes to being interviewed for our Neighborhood Watch sermon series. And we are talking today about the clause in that parable prophecy, I was sick and you cared for me. So in that template, I wanted to ask Ashley a couple of things. Number one, how did you feel called and accept the call to become a chaplain?
Well, I did congregational ministry for a few years before I came here. What I love about being a chaplain is I feel like it's the best parts of being a pastor. And I know we're all called to different things, and Pastor Dan has certainly got gift of mission work and congregational responsibility. What I love about this is that I get to be at the bedside of people who are sick and are in need. I work on the palliative care team in particular, which involves some end-of-life conversation and conversations about goals of care. And what I found is that by visiting people in the hospital, I get invited into some of the most intimate moments in people's lives. People, a lot of times, who are strangers that I've never met before, and I'm invited to be there as they make decisions in the midst of suffering, as they provide time and care with their own loved ones, and I get invited into that.
Wow. You know, would you have advice, pastoral chaplainly advice, for the most of people who are watching who would find it pretty uncomfortable to be sitting next to somebody who is either in a lot of pain or who is at the end of their life?
Yeah.
You can probably imagine, you see them, they're in the families or the friends every day that come in to visit your patients. What advice would you have for someone who's trying to bring a gift of presence to those patients?
I like the language that you use, Pastor Dan, about them being uncomfortable. Something that we learn kind of in the basics of learning to be chaplains is that to recognize and articulate some of the feelings that are in the room. And so if you feel uncomfortable by someone's bedside, they probably feel uncomfortable too. If you feel sad, if you feel helpless. Helpless is a very common feeling that happens in hospital rooms. It's okay to say that. Gosh, I feel helpless now. I wish I had a magic wand and I can make this illness go away. I imagine that the person who's sick feels the same way. Sometimes I hear stories when someone is dying, for instance, and a family member isn't going to come. They say, oh, my son just doesn't like hospitals. Well, the truth is a lot of people don't like to be around illness, and no one wants to be here, but here we are. And the world gives us these situations that we have to go through. And we as a community of God are called to be together in the midst of those and to remind each other that, that we're not alone. No matter how uncomfortable it gets, no matter how hard it is, no matter how helpless we feel, we can go through this together.
Yeah. I remember when I was training to be a chaplain while I was in seminary, clinical pastoral education, which you're the director here, right?
I am not actually certified to be a supervisor for clinical pastoral education, but I am one of the people who created and developed the program here at the University of Kansas Health System.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay. I knew you were responsible for a lot of cool stuff. But that was one of the hardest ministries I've ever done. You know, I mean, it's not about me, but it was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. And I found that coming to grips with my own discomfort and trying to leave that behind and being more vulnerable with that was the way that I made people, like you said, less uncomfortable around me. And we have a lot of people at Caw Prairie who have genuinely wonderful pastoral hearts.
Yeah.
So kind of a related question is, if somebody's better as a visitor at somebody's bedside than, say, a pastor, do you recommend, or do you have some tips for like a visitor from a church who's coming to visit someone that they know a little bit or maybe not at all?
Right. Right. Well, first of all, you made the distinction between a pastor and a layperson who is visiting, and it's important to know what role that you might play. I know that as a chaplain here, as someone who, again, might be a stranger in the room, there might be things that someone can share with me that they wouldn't share with their own pastor or with their family, because I just offer an ear that is different. And so that's something to keep in mind, but also to recognize what your role might be at that bedside. Also, listen, listen, listen. People need to be heard. They don't need to be entertained. They need to be heard. Recognize what the need is in the room. And I think this is what makes us uncomfortable, is that we really can't do what we want to do, which is make that person better, to take away the pain, to take away the struggle. And that's one of the hardest things, I think, in bedside ministry, is that you don't leave the room saying, oh, I've checked this off the list, this person's better now. Instead, it's a matter of sharing a presence with each other, that presence that Jesus shows us when he sits at the table eating with people, when he walks along the path with his disciples, and that God showed us when the people were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. God was there in the midst of all that struggle and all that pain, and that's what we're called to do too.
Oh, that's a great point. That's a great point about we want to make things better. A lot of us that are watching are fixers, right?
Yes.
Whether we're men or women, doesn't matter what we're fixing and why, but if we can't fix, we're frustrated.
Absolutely.
Well, tell us, what's your relationship to the medical staff, right?
Okay.
The people who are the technical fixers here.
Right.
How does that play? What's your how does that make you feel?
Well, there are a couple of things that I do with the medical staff here. We call them IDTs, interdisciplinary teams. And what I can do is provide support for them when they're in need. I do therapeutic Thursdays once every month, where I come in and I also call it Donuts with the Chaplain, where we can sit and just talk about some of the difficult things that have happened. Excuse me. I also am, again, part of an interdisciplinary team in a sense that I give my evaluation of what a patient is going through and what spiritual needs might be there as they're going through their illness. And then, of course, the pastoral duties of being there for sacramental needs. But oftentimes, people who provide medical care have to just keep working. A death happens or something difficult happens, and nurses, doctors still have to go on to the next patient. What we've started here at KU is a pause, which is a moment when the team gathers and just takes a deep breath and has a moment of silence. It gives them a chance to sort of reorient, to let themselves identify the feelings that are there, but then continue with their work.
Well, that's really cool.
Thank
Very
you.
profound. So just, at Caw Prairie, I like to see things like alliterate or rhyme or something. So if I could just make an unsolicited suggestion, Donuts with the Chaplain is cool, but there's a Taco Bell not too far away. What if you did chalupas with the Chaplain?
That sounds magnificent. I would love to do chalupas with the Chaplain.
So I wanted to ask you, Ashley, about the first original call you had, not just a chaplaincy, but what is it that brought you as a young person to a call to ministry?
Yeah, I like that you identified how young I was. I knew that I was called to be a pastor when I was 18 years old. And it was a time in my life when I was searching and I had this whole world open to me. I think those of us who are in high school know that, gosh, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? It's hard to make those choices. And so I had tried a few things and realized that they weren't for me. After high school, the summer after I graduated, I went and lived with my grandparents, and my grandfather is a POW who's Baptist and reads his Bible regularly, and so I had his influence. And then I received a letter from my pastor's wife from Emporia, Kansas, St. Mark's Lutheran, Deborah Ruprecht, wrote a letter to me and said, I remember when you were in confirmation and said that you thought you might want to be a pastor. And she told me that I had the gifts that, and that she hoped I'd pursue that. And that's what got me started thinking. We in the ELCA believe that, that a call comes from within, it comes from God, and we confirm that within ourselves, but also that the community confirms that. And so that was the summer of my 18th year when I just, summer after high school, when I really explored what was the call inside me and what do other people around me say about that.
Wow. Well, praise God for Mrs. Ruprecht.
Absolutely. She's amazing.
That's really cool. That's cool. So, high schoolers, I want you to listen to that. There could be a call on your life. And adults who are mentors or see these high school students, look at what it did.
Absolutely.
So I want my friends online to know that Pastor Ashley is not only respected and renowned for her work here in the chaplaincy world, but she is just a blast to be around.
Oh, thank you.
And any like church convention or meeting, if someone says, "Hey, Ashley's going to be there," we're like, "All right, we'll go."
All right.
So,
thank you.
So you bring a whole lot of Holy Spirit with you.
Thanks a lot, Pastor. Yeah.
So speaking of Holy Spirit, we've been sitting here in this very. It's a small chapel here. It does the job, and there's interesting things all throughout the room. But this background behind us is particularly noteworthy. Could you explain what this is?
Sure. So what we have here is a prayer wall. This is actually one of 2 prayer walls that we have at KU Hospital at the main campus. We usually have papers here where people can write their prayers. At the other chapel, on a weekly basis, we take those prayers out because the wall fills up almost completely, and we read them as a group and lift up those prayers, and then we burn them and let the smoke rise up to God. And here we leave them here for a while, and people are encouraged to take out some of the prayers and read them and lift those up. And so if you're ever here, whether it's as a patient or visiting a family member, we do hope that you'll take a little time and let these prayers be lifted up here in the chapels.
And did the idea come from Jerusalem and the
Yes.
Western Wall?
Yes. Right.
That's cool.
Right. I'm not sure what they do with those, if they just leave them in all the time. I'm sure someone knows.
You know what? For those of you watching online, if you know the answer to that, or you can Google faster than we can, put that in the chat box.
Great. Thank you.
We'll find out what the real answer is. So. Anyway, well, Ashley, this has been really fun to have you share like this. We're grateful for your time. I'm grateful for your collegial professional excellence and your good humor. It's always fun to be with you.
Well, I appreciate and am honored to be asked. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Caw Prairie. For me. So with me now is Sonda Caffrey, who is a retired RN, registered nurse,
Yes.
and currently is serving as a volunteer hospice caregiver, or is that the right word? Hospice volunteer, and also serves at Caw Prairie, our church, as the care director. Well, she's the one we call if we don't know what to do when somebody's sick. So, Sonda, first of all, just let me ask you, tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, your background, and how it is you came to Caw Prairie.
Well, I moved here about 4 years ago.
Okay.
After my husband passed away, we had lived out south on a little small farm, and after he passed away, I realized that I didn't want to mow 14 acres, so I moved up this way.
Okay.
And that's how I got involved with Caw Prairie, because I only live about a mile from here. So.
Oh, that's right. And a lot less than 14 acres, too.
Yes, indeed.
And somebody else mows it, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, tell us about your nursing career. What inspired you to become a nurse?
Well, I didn't start out as a nurse. I started out as a school teacher, and I did that for a couple of years, and then stopped for a while and had a couple of children. And when they were about 6 and 9, I think, I went to my husband one day and said, "What would you think if I went back to school to become a nurse?" And he said, "Hey, sounds good." So the rest is history.
Had he heard you stressing out in the evening about homework or the kids?
I don't know exactly what called me to do that, but I never have regretted it. I've always enjoyed being a nurse.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, and then at retirement, I don't know, did you give yourself a couple of years off, or did you just jump right into this volunteer ministry? What was that like?
Well, I didn't know very much about hospice. And even though I'd been a nurse for years and years, I mean, I knew there was such a thing, but I didn't have any personal involvement with it. But then my mother-in-law became ill with cancer, and we got hospice involved with her care, and we're just delighted with how caring they were, and it was a real eye-opening experience as to what a good thing hospice is. And I know some people are very hesitant about it, but I would certainly recommend it in those circumstances. And then unfortunately, several years later, my husband became ill with a terminal disease, and we talked a lot about the end stages, and he was very adamant that he did want hospice, having seen how they benefited his mother. And that when the time came, he wanted to die at home. So again, we had a very good experience with hospice, but one thing that I noticed was that they had almost no volunteers willing to go out into a person's home. They would volunteer in the hospice house, but they had a hesitation for going into someone's home. And what I found personally was that if you're a caregiver, the person who is dying, their needs are met very well, but the caregiver's needs sometimes aren't.
Oh, that makes sense.
Because it's a 24/7 situation.
Right.
And if you're the wife of someone who's terminally ill, perhaps you need to just get out and walk around the block a couple of times and clear your mind, or maybe you need a haircut, or
Right.
To go shopping to go to the drugstore.
Right.
You know, just those kinds of things. You need some respite from it so that it's not a 24-hour thing. And it's something that I told myself, you know, when all this is finished, that's something that I feel a calling to do. Now, I don't want to make that sound too esoteric.
Yeah. In other words, explain it to the folks at home. What does it mean to?
I don't. It doesn't require a lot of special skills to be a hospice volunteer. You just have to be willing to do it, and you have to be willing to go into someone else's home and sit with someone for a while and not be intimidated or anything by the fact that the person is terminal.
So you don't need to have been a nurse or an EMT or something.
Absolutely not. That's something that I would definitely want to emphasize. Is all you need is the willingness to do it. To just say, okay, I'll take these 2 hours and I'll help this person just like I would help a neighbor or a family member or a friend. And they could be your neighbor or your family member or your friend. You just haven't met them yet.
Right.
So that's something that I definitely would want to emphasize. If you feel that you have a calling, I hate to use that word because it sounds like a minister.
Sounds like it's from God.
Well,
But it is from God. If you've got a spirit nudge that you should do something, or that you've got the gifts for it.
but what I want to say is it doesn't require someone special. It just requires you to just take that step and do it.
Well, for a church that likes to solve problems, right? I mean, a lot of us, we're fix-it people, right?
Exactly.
I can see where that's just good to know. So it's not that you're asked to do any sort of entry-level medical stuff.
No, the nurses take care of all that, but they're only there for a limited amount of time, and there's always someone that's the caregiver in the family.
Okay.
Who's there all the time, who needs the relief.
Okay. So you're bringing respite to the family member or loved one who's caring for
Exactly.
the person who's dying, who's terminal. Is it often that you have conversations? I mean, I suppose it depends what stage of hospice care they're in. Do you have conversations with the patient, with the terminal person?
It certainly depends on the stage they're in, and sometimes they want to talk. And then again, you're talking to a neighbor or a friend or a family member, and they may talk about dying. Many times they're at a point where they don't want to talk anymore,
Right.
or they can't. So.
Right. Well, is there any anecdote or story or something that kind of has stuck with you as either being typical or unusual in your ministry? I'm calling it a ministry that you do there as a hospice volunteer.
I can't think of a particular particular episode, but I can say that you just have to be with the people as they are, and maybe they are not going to behave the way you think they should behave. Maybe all they want to do is watch TV, and that's up to them. If that's all they want to do in their last days, then that is certainly up to them, and we have to be non-judgmental about it and say, okay, if you want to watch Criminal Minds, we'll watch Criminal Minds.
But you have this ministry of presence, being with them.
Yes.
For whatever reason they want to watch whatever show, there's a person that loves them sitting next to them while they do it.
And sometimes it's a matter of holding hands. A lot of people want to hold your hand.
Oh yeah. Well, I can say, Sonda, that as one of the pastors at Caw Prairie, I've been in a lot of hospice situations. Most of them end stage at a hospice house, and I too, like your husband, have seen an amazing amount of powerful caregiving and treating people who are losing so much of their bodily function, independence, and just not only loving them, but how they're shown such respect and treated with dignity.
Yes.
And I think that presence of having somebody who's caring and thoughtful, who's willing to take them as they are on their terms, with the respect and love that Jesus would have for them, and kind of your Jesus with a hand to hold, really, at that point. So, well, you also have said yes to a ministry role at Caw Prairie, and it's still kind of morphing out. We don't have a lot of people that are in need of care ministry, but every once in a while, and oftentimes it involves an end of life situation. Every once in a while we do. Do you need any help, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Well, we can always use help, and I think it would be wrong for us to say, we've got it all covered, because we don't know whether we have it all covered or not, because we don't know what's going on with everyone at all times. And so I guess if there's any message I would give, it would be, don't hesitate to let someone in the church know, myself or you or any of the staff on church, and they will funnel the information into the appropriate area. But I would say that there may be hidden needs out there, or people are hesitant to ask for help, But to me, congregational care, it's just like caring for your friends or your neighbors, because that's what we all are. We are our neighbors. And if you have someone, if you know of someone that you think has a need, let us know. We'd be glad to see what we can do about it.
Well, I'll tell you what, for those of you watching here online, we will be putting the the email address for the care ministry there in the chat box. And as always, you can simply send an email to either admin@Caw Prairie or to me, Pastor Dan @Caw Prairie, and I will probably pass it on. I used to tell new member classes that I love you. When I see you on a Sunday morning, I'm going to be excited to see you. I mean, when it's too crowded, I maybe not say hi to everybody, but I do love you. And if things are really rough, I will do my best to get out to visit and help. But generally, you don't want to see me in your hospital room, because that means things are going real bad. And a lot of classes have taken that really seriously. Like, okay, it's not bad enough for Pastor Dan. But I think if I was watching and I saw the gentle, confident but humble spirit that you have brought to everything that I've seen you involved with, Sonda, I would want to say, if I had the spiritual gifts of mercy and helps, to kind of use the old Bible language, if I just have compassion for people and want to know there's somewhere that I can use it for God's purposes, to be a good neighbor and a good faith family member, I would trust my hours with you and say, sign me up, Sonda. So, well, Sonda, it's really a privilege to have you come up here to our new studio for me to interview you. When Pastor Chris gets back, I'll ask him how I did with this whole light deal here. But most of all, we're awful glad that you're part of Caw Prairie. I'm sorry I never had a chance to meet your husband. I have heard wonderful things. And I'm glad that in this season of your life, you can be doing God's work with us.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you once again, Ashley and Sonda, for sharing your heart and sharing your journey and following your calling to care for those who are sick, who are dying, and whom God has placed in your path. And now, Caw Prairie, as we close the sermon series, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being with me during the month of July. Thank you for welcoming Pastor Chris when he returns with the beginning of a new series next Sunday. And please, in the spirit of today's message of I was sick and you visited me, I'm gonna just tweak it a little bit. How about I didn't want to get sick, so you vaccinated yourself? You know, Christians have got a reputation in the ancient world for sticking it out when there was a pandemic, when there was a disease, when there was a plague. We Christians were the one who took care of the city, whether they were Christian or not. I want to challenge us as Christians. Let's be the ones that take care of our cities now. Let's be the ones who quit arguing about our rights and start dreaming about our opportunities to serve. Let's stop arguing about whether we're going to wear a mask. You know, I don't want to wear a mask, but let's quit arguing about it. And let's start letting people see the face of Jesus in however much of our face they can see. And let's stop turning to cable news networks for the words to live by and turn back to the words of Jesus. For when we did this, for one of the least of these, we were doing it to him. I love you, Caw Prairie. Love yourself. Love your family. Get vaccinated. And be healthy, well, and follow Jesus. See you next week.